Ackland Hood has given evidence that over the course of December, two things happened. First of all, that there was an increasing ask on the Department for Education in terms of the amount of testing that it would have to ensure was provided. Do you recollect that?
Yes, absolutely. And that was very much in the context of the period at the second half of 2020, when we started to get very interested in mass testing as a way of reopening settings, schools and other things. And it's absolutely correct that I wanted to see mass testing in schools as part of the way of getting schools open.
And I think what she gave evidence of was a very specific set of increases in the ask that was being made of the Department for Education, which in turn became the ask being made of schools. Do you recollect that?
I do, and I remember that it wasn't easy, and I think that the department, again, I think the department acquitted themselves heroically in this respect. I think they really tried to get mass testing going. I think they stood up a huge amount of facilities very, very fast. But as I'm sure you're coming to, that it was just never going to be a runner because of the Alpha, the Kent variant.
I'll turn to that. The other point that she made and developed in her evidence was that in terms of the manpower to provide the testing, that it became clear that that would also have to be provided, as it were, largely by the Department for Education, but in reality it would have to be provided by schools. Again, does that accord with your memory?
It does, and I was conscious of the extra burden we were putting on teachers, and it's as you know, the way the schools work in this country, what the man and woman in Whitehall says doesn't necessarily follow everywhere, and it's a very complicated system. But on the whole, the schools did stand up a quite extraordinary amount of testing capability.
So, Mr. Johnson, we've heard the Department for Education perspective on the events leading up to the 4th of January, and we've heard the perspective of Professor Sir Chris Whitty as well. I think it's important that the inquiry also hears your evidence about your perspective on it. But can I take you, and just to set the scene, to a document that we have at INQ 0009 1147. This wasn't a document addressed to you, Mr. Johnson, because it was the chair's brief for this COVID-0 meeting of the 16th of December 2020. But we can see underneath the introduction that you had given a strong steer that you would like the return to face-to-face attendance to be staggered and for testing to be used as fully as possible to support this. Yes?
Yes.
And if we look at the last bullet in that sequence, that we are all well aware that this is a major delivery challenge, correct?
Yes.
And I think if we go over the page, please, to the background, and if we look at the second bullet, it records that the Education Secretary had spoken to you that morning, that there had been agreement about who would go back and the testing in place. And then beneath that there were significant delivery challenges, correct?
Yes.
And it says at the bottom of that paragraph, the biggest issue to resolve is workforce. There is not yet agreement as to where this will come from. Teaching, military, other surge workforce, etc. And therefore the Department of Health and Social Care Secretary of State didn't want to put his name to the paper, correct? Do you remember that there was...
I remember the difficulties in standing up the testing operation. I remember the department really straining to get it done, but what I also remember is that in the end, I think they were in a position to deliver. I remember though I can't remember the ins and outs of it. I remember a conversation about the MACA and whether we'd use the army or not. But I think it ended up with the schools doing it.
And do you recollect the tensions at this time between the Secretary of State for Health and the Secretary of State for Education in terms of trying to resolve where this manpower would come from?
I'm sorry, I don't remember the specifics of that.
All right, and I think if we go to the position that was reached then on the 28th of December, and we have this at INQ 000075504. And again, Mr. Johnson, just to help with your memory of this, we can see that this is an email of the 28th of December.
28th, right.
Yes, from a Miss Burns from number 10. And obviously by this stage it's very clear, isn't it, that the new variant was what was driving transmission, correct?
Yes,
we can pick that up from the first bullet.
That's right. I mean, the documents I've just looked at to refresh my memory suggested that really the penny sort of started to drop on the 22nd, but yes, I think it was very clear by the 28th.
All right. And if we look at the second paragraph below those first set of bullets, that the Education Secretary had set out the social cost of closing schools. And then below that we see again the 4 bullets for getting schools back, yes?
Yes.
And we can see here the plan set out that in terms of secondary schools that there would be a delay until the 18th of January to get all of the children back.
Yes.
And then that there would be the weekly testing of schools, of pupils, yes?
Yes. Is this the 28th still?
It is, yes. And I think if we go over the page, please. This is quite a long section, Mr. Johnson, and I won't read all of it out. But I think we can see here some of the different arguments being ventilated. So the first part of that page, we can see set out the Secretary of State for Health's arguments. Yes?
Yes.
So that it would be that the 18th of January might be too soon, and seeking a clear decision at this point. Yes?
Yes.
And is that right? Was he effectively arguing that a decision ought to be made around that date as to whether or not schools should in fact reopen in the January?
Look, I think you can generally take it during this period that there's... I can't remember the specifics about the issue on testing between DFE and Department of Health, but... there's generally a tension about, whether it's going to be sensible to open up and how fast, or as soon as we see the Kent variant, the Alpha variant, and I don't remember Matt saying that, but it seems entirely plausible.
Okay, and if we just read this down, and if we drop down a couple of paragraphs, we can see reference to the advice that was being given by the Chief Scientific Advisor. And if we follow that down by a couple of sentences, he was advising, we know that children do transmit and take it back into households, and that when half-term occurs, there is a decrease in spread, so advising that school closures do have an effect, correct?
Yes. Then why are we talking about half term now? Because we got Christmas.
I think he's talking about retrospectively. Okay. It can be seen that half term has an effect.
Yes, right.
And then after that, we can also see the advice being provided by the Chief Medical Officer as well, who was also advising that it was regional differences at this point in time that was making the decision difficult, correct? That
looks the kind of, yes, I mean, I'm sure that's right.
But may I just focus then on the last paragraph of this section? In conclusion, the Prime Minister understood the DFE proposal and thought that mass testing proposal sounded positive, although he could also see the arguments for having a lower risk appetite on opening. Decisions would need to be taken in the round this week. And then we can see set out, in the meantime, on schools specifically, he would like to urgently see the delivery plan on testing in every school for the start of term, as well as understanding the precise policy, i.e. are we compelling individual schools, how, what's the form of words he could use, and whether weekly testing is deliverable, and what could be done to make that happen. And then we can see, please can the DFE provide a note on the above, working with test and trace for 6:30 p.m. And I think we can see that that email was sent by 3:30, was sent at 3:30 p.m. So again, does that correspond with your memory, Mr. Johnson, that even as at this date,
what date is this now?
28th of December,
yeah.
that there wasn't a clear plan as far as you were concerned for testing in schools, and that you were still seeking clarification as to what such a plan would look like?
Yes, I think I was seeking clarification, but I don't think that that meant that I thought that it was undeliverable. I mean, my impression was that they were making progress and that they were going to be able to stand up testing. And maybe I'm wrong. I think that was the testimony of Mrs. Ackland Hood as well, but I might be wrong about that.
Well, I'm just testing at the moment what your understanding was on the 28th of December, because some of the questions that seem to be asked by you at this point seem like quite fundamental questions.
Sure, and quite rightly, but I don't. All I'm trying to say is, from the best of my memory, that doesn't mean that I thought that the plan was necessarily undeliverable. You know, I wanted to make sure that we belt and braced it, that it was all ready to go, but I wasn't going to junk it.
And can you help with why at this point? I mean, it very much appears to be the case, and borne out by what Miss Ackland Hood explained, that this massive effort was very much on the shoulders of the Department for Education and schools, as opposed to being a more shared effort. Why was it? Why had it fallen principally to the department and to schools to deliver this massive?
Well, they had to test.
Regime.
They had to test secondary school kids going back into secondary school, which was going to be, you know, I think we had a plan to stagger that anyway. I didn't think it was such an unreasonable thing to ask. I know it was onerous, but I believe they could do it given the alternative, and the alternative was again more loss of learning, greater detriment to their pupils, about which they cared passionately, and as did we all.
Yes, but Miss Ackland's evidence about that was that she felt they were asking something deeply unreasonable of schools. You know, in other words, the teachers were there to teach the children. They weren't there to implement a mass testing regime in secondary schools, although her evidence is that nonetheless schools rose to the challenge.
I think they did.
And I think, again, it's coming back to the point, Mr. Johnson, about the importance that was attached to this or not by government in terms of getting children back to school.
Well, I think huge importance was attached to it, and that's why we kept going with the policy in spite of the obvious difficulties. And if you look at we were in an environment where the numbers of cases were starting to rise quite sharply, and I also knew, of course, that we were going to have the vaccines coming down the track at some point. It seemed to me that this was, I knew it was a huge effort, but it was worth it just to get the kids back in school. And if we could use my plan was to try to use mass testing as I told the inquiry before, as a way to try to reopen society. And in the end, that didn't work, and it was superseded by the vaccines. But in the back end, in the second half of 2020, that was the only shot we had. Mass testing was the only way through for the country that I could see, and so that was why it was so important. Now, on should the DHSC have done it? Should the Army have done it? Should some other body have done it to relieve the pressure on teachers and schools? Very possibly. I can't, I'm afraid, now go into the arguments, because I simply can't at this stage recollect them. I can imagine that health and social care staff were very heavily engaged doing other things, as were the others. But I can't give you the balance of the arguments now. We had to, if we could stand up testing in schools, we had to do it if we possibly could, and that was the plan. We were beaten by Alpha.
And may I ask you, were you satisfied ultimately that the plans for schools, despite the enormous ask of teachers, were you satisfied that they were sufficiently robust? That they
the plans
did,
for testing?
Yes, that they did have a chance. I mean, obviously that changed, but in terms of the plans that you had asked for and the increased ask, were you satisfied that the Department for Education was in the position of being able to deliver that?
My memory is I had confidence in them and in what they were doing. It's clear from those questions that I'm pushing them so that I'm going to be in a position to get, because the public will be extremely interested and concerned to hear about their kids being tested in school. They're going to want to know who's in charge, how it works, and all sorts of things. I need to know the details. So I think that's why I'm asking those questions. I'm going to have to explain it.
Yes, but you're asking the really basic question of can we actually do weekly testing in schools?
Yes, and I think the answer was yes, but it was tough. But many of the things that we faced in COVID were extremely tough.
And was the position reached then once again that you were effectively overtaken by events? Because on the 30th of December, in fact, you had to start closing primary schools in different parts of England.
It was an absolute, of all the really, really low moments it was terrible, that whole period, because, I could see the cavalry coming over the hill in the form of the vaccines. I thought mass testing offered a way forward, but it was clear that the January spike, I think, was bigger than the April spike of 2020, and that plan to open on January the 4th, staggered, was defeated by Alpha.
Was it the worst of all worlds then that some primary schools around the country opened on the 4th of January only to have to close again that day because of the reversal of position? Yes,
but it was, and I'm very sorry to them for their efforts that were in vain. The inquiry was asking, I'm sure you are, about were there other options we could have used then at any stage to reduce the R other than closing schools? Was that really the right tool to use? Looking back, honestly, I'm not certain, but at the time, it seemed like the only option. If the risk was, if we had another doubling, we would see a very serious number of fatalities, and then another doubling, and we had to get the R below 1. I think that's what people sometimes forget. Why something a relatively small thing like closing schools can take the speed out of the circulation and make all the difference. Otherwise, sorry.
No, sorry, I was interrupting you. Sorry.
Well, no, but otherwise, mathematically, it either doubles or halves.
That I certainly follow. Mr. Johnson, can I ask, why was it that the decision had to wait, so that to close had to wait? So in other words, they opened, the primary schools opened 4th of January and then closed that night. Could the decision not have been taken earlier, that you were forced to close?
I'm sure, look, with hindsight, my lady, of course it could have been taken earlier, and it would have looked better and have felt less bumpy to everybody had it been taken earlier. Of course that's right. But at the time, it wasn't as obvious to me as it seems now. At the time, I was still very much divided and very, very keen, as indeed was Gavin Williamson, to see if we could keep going.
Just turning to Sir Gavin Williamson, what he sets out in his witness statement, and perhaps we can just bring this up for ease. It's at INQ 000 588 024, please. Page 83. And paragraph 10.26. Just to highlight, Mr. Johnson, I think the point about how 11th hour this decision actually was. His evidence is that when he spoke to you on the morning of the 4th of January 2021, your message to him was about keeping schools open and doing everything to ensure that that remained the position, and that he explained that something like 85% of schools had actually opened. So in other words, saying...
looking at that, I can understand how a Secretary of State would feel frustrated. Of course, I totally understand that, and it was a very, very difficult situation, and we had to take decisions throughout the pandemic based on our best judgment of the way things were at the time, and that inevitably changed. And that was the day, sadly, when it became clear to me that we couldn't continue with a policy of opening the schools. Now, maybe it should have occurred to me, maybe I should have resolved that earlier in my mind, but that's easy to say with hindsight. I wondered if I possibly could to keep them open.
If we just look, please, at what he says at just after that, please, at paragraph 10.27, he says that he receives a phone call from Mr. Rosenfield at 12:30 that day to tell him that, in fact, schools would close. So I think, Mr. Johnson, to come full circle on the point that was made at the very start of your evidence, and this question of whether or not the Department for Education was at the table when some of these most significant decisions were made, I think we see here that they weren't at the table and that you told him that schools would close. That is right, isn't it?
Yes, and that's absolutely right. And I think you're looking at the reality of the way things have to run in government, and particularly during a pandemic. Gavin rightly owned the interests of schools and young people. He had to promote that. I had the problem of trying to balance the interests of the entire country and every single potential COVID victim, and it was hellishly difficult. And of course, I think Gavin has said, I think my instincts were, my inclinations were very much the same as his, but in the end, we had to take the public health issue into account, and we had to put it first. I'm sorry, but we had to put it first.
So if we just, in terms of going to the meeting where the decision was made, then we have that at INQ 000 146 739, please. And I think that we can see from the top of this that it's the 4th of January and it's the COVID-0 meeting. Is that right?
It sounds right, yes.
Yes, and yes. We can see that those present are Sir Michael Gove, the Chancellor, and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, correct?
Yes.
and various officials. And I
Yes.
think that if we go over the page then, please, to page 4. And I think it's the penultimate paragraph, Mr. Johnson. We can see here the Director General for Strategy in the COVID-19 Task Force said that there were big choices for the Committee on Schools. Yes, so returning to the question of whether schools should reopen after the 18th of January, yes? That's secondary schools, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And I think as well, if we look in terms of the things that were discussed during that meeting, if we look at B, for example, so in discussion, sorry, it's page 5. It sets out all of the things that were discussed. And for example, we see at B, it was always better to surprise on the upside rather than the downside. Therefore, government should act quickly and robustly to close all schools. Further on down, there was mass flagrant abuse of the rules, and unless measures taken were even tougher than in March, they would not be taken seriously. Yes?
Yes, I don't remember that particular intervention, but that does not surprise me at all.
And then a few paragraphs down from this paragraph E, any intervention would only be successful if it succeeded in changing public behaviour, yes?
Yes.
And then the reference there underneath it, G, that deaths had increased by 25% within a week, yes? So
Yeah.
the stark public health issue that you had to confront, correct?
Correct.
And then if we go over the page, please, to H, the suggestion that schools could resume face-to-face learning for all students at the end of January, from the February half term, or from the end of February, yes.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And I don't think we need to go through the whole of this document, but it is right, isn't it, that at the end of this meeting you then decided that you would close schools to all children once again, correct?
Yes. Yes. I think that's right. This is the fourth of.
Yes, it
yes,
is.
absolutely. Yes.
And it obviously fits in with what Sir Gavin Williamson has said, that he spoke to you first thing in the morning when it was, your message was, yes, schools are staying open, full steam ahead, so to speak, only for him to be told a couple of hours later that that was no longer the case, yes?
That's correct.
And that this was the meeting that happened in between to change the direction of travel, yes?
There I'm not certain, but it looks
fits
there
with
would be plenty of discussions going on throughout the day and people bringing me bits of information, but that could well be how it happened. Yes, I just can't remember.
But I think, Mr. Johnson, from everything you've said, you didn't see any issue about taking this decision on the 4th of January without having the Department for Education at the table to speak to any of these issues about education or when schools might be able to reopen or any of the other issues that were relevant.
If you look at so I'd spent the day in contact with Gavin, I think by our own account of this thing. This day, I'm talking to him in the morning. I'm well aware of his position. I'm well aware of his concerns, and we've been talking about it the whole time, continuously. And as I said, I shared his instincts and understood very much what his message was. There was no need for I didn't need to hear him directly in my ear to understand what he would feel about this. But it was clear to me that because of Alpha, the balance of the argument had shifted, and I could have. I had no option. Given the facts as they presented themselves that day. I felt I had no option but to close down and or to prevent the reopening of schools. Imagine the kind of factual. Imagine, well, there's no need for me to go through it.
Mr Johnson, Sir Gavin Williamson has been very critical of the decisions to close schools on the 4th of January.
And I understand why he feels as he does, and he's, you know, people are. He's a secretary. He was the Secretary of State for Education. He wanted to see kids in school, and that's entirely laudable.
I mean, what he has said is that the decision was made, and I'm paraphrasing, but I hope accurately, that the decision was made not because it would have a significant impact on the infection rate, but more because the government had to be seen to be using all possible options to turn things around.
Well, again, I respectfully disagree, because although the schools themselves might make up a small part of the budget of measures that you need to press the R, it can be critical. And the problem with bringing the schools back, as everybody knows, is that there's a delay because of when the virus starts circulating in schools. There's a delay between the kids contracting it and then passing it on, and then the adults being infected. And so you're storing up potentially very, very big problems. And I think I understand his frustration, and it's a proper frustration on the part of a Secretary of State with a department to run who's thinking about kids and their interests.
He said that it had, and I mean the closure of schools in January 2021 was likened to smashing a Ming vase on the floor. So in other words, that you had to do something. You had to make a bold move and something dramatic in order to get the public.
We had to stop a second doubling of a doubling of the wave. I think the paper we've just been looking at said there'd been a 25% increase in deaths overnight. I think I may have got that wrong. You can't ignore that sort of data.
And again, I'm putting the criticisms, Mr Johnson, he makes, but he said that it was a panic decision and that it wasn't required.
Well, you know, I respectfully disagree. It grieved everybody to have to do it. It's the last thing I wanted to do. But the numbers were very difficult to argue with.
Can I ask, as far as you were concerned, in January 21, was there a direct causative link between closing schools and reducing the R number? Or was it the effect of closing schools on the public messaging, which seemed to be what one of the papers...
The Ming vase point?
Yeah.
No, I think it was... well, I mean, obviously it was both. But as I understood it, the schools alone could take about 10 or 20% out of the R. So if the R is 1.1, that obviously gets you halving rather than doubling, and that's a critical thing.
Thank you.
Mr Johnson, I think from everything you have said, that you accept that these periods of school closure had the most awful impact on all children in England of school age, and also a disproportionate impact on those most disadvantaged children in our society. Yeah. And it was for that reason, wasn't it, that you appointed Sir Kevin Collins as Educational Recovery Commissioner, is that right?
Yeah.
Just before we go on to his to your evidence about his appointment and his recovery plan, I just wanted to refer to an account that was given to the inquiry, and it's Every Story Matters piece of work. And this was selected because, on the one hand, it's probably a story that isn't that out of the ordinary for many young people, but
I read it. It's about the footballer.
Yes. I'm just going to, maybe if we bring that up on screen, please. But the parent who set out, my eldest son was expected to get Scout